Namaskar and welcome to the eighth talk in the series of studies in Sri Aurobindo. We have today another wonderful speaker, Mr. Srinivas Mulugu, and he has a wonderful history of having worked in the corporate world in the US and has toured abroad for many reasons, being head of many institutions. However, Sri Aurobindo's and mother's call were very strong. So he took retirement at an early age and has been pursuing the works in the field of mother and Sri Aurobindo. His only aim has been to reach out to the youth of the country the message of mother and Sri Aurobindo. At present, he is the vice chairman of Sri Aurobindo Society for Telangana State. He is also National Director for Sri Aurobindo Foundation for Integral Management, SAFIM, and for Auro Youth, and the initiative of Sri Aurobindo Society to take the message of Sri Aurobindo to the youth of India. He has had the unique privilege of interacting with a lot of early sadhaks of Sri Aurobindo Ashram, and that has definitely benefited and shaped his life and his way of working and reaching out to the youth of the country. So today, Srinivas Mulugu as we call him Srinivas here, he is going to give us an overview of integral yoga to us. He has started out a framework of integral yoga for all of us, and we will be very much benefited by those points that he is going to share with us in this 1 hour. If there are any questions, you may post it on the chat box here or later on the WhatsApp, which will be kept open until tomorrow morning, 10 o'clock. So over to you, Bhaiya, and we look forward to hearing from you the framework of integral yoga.
Thank you, Shruti. Thank you. Namaste, everyone. Welcome to this evening session on summary of integral yoga, overview of integral yoga under the Sakar banner. I'm grateful to the entire Sakar team and in particular to Anand Bhaiya and Shruti for taking the initiative of covering so many dimensions of Mother and Sri Aurobindo and bringing them to all of us. As much as I'm a speaker today in this series, I have also been very closely following every talk in this series and in the series before as well to benefit from the repertoire of knowledge that is being laid out in front of us. So first of all, gratitude to the entire team that is making it possible. Today's talk has primarily three categories of audience in mind. First and foremost, this talk is meant for any spiritual seeker who is trying to understand how to go about spirituality and spiritual life. The second, those who have developed some interest and understanding of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, and they're trying to come to grips with the entire domain of integral yoga. And the third, those who have read Mother and Sri Aurobindo for a few years, understood several pieces, have been followers and devotees of Mother and Sri Aurobindo, and on them rests the glorious responsibility of probably spreading the light a little further also. And this talk would be immensely helpful in trying to offer to others, in a very simple way, a fairly comprehensive understanding of integral yoga. First and foremost, I would like to say that it is important that we understand what is the central focus of integral yoga. What is the one word around which the entire integral yoga revolves? In fact, not only integral yoga, but probably all spiritual paths revolve. And and that word is consciousness. Essentially, the entire journey of human evolution is about consciousness, and all of integral yoga is about consciousness. We need to keep that in mind when we are talking of Sri Aurobindo and Mother and the journey of integral yoga. The way this talk is structured is around 12 themes are being brought together in a increasing order of importance or complexity, however you call it, so that we can understand step by step, what is laid out in integral yoga. You can call this frameworks of integral yoga, and sometimes multiple frameworks can be laid on top of each other to understand deeper what goes on. Another aspect is when you understand these frameworks and you look at the 37 volumes of Sri Aurobindo, every volume will refer to at least one, if not often, actually 4 or 5 of these themes. It is just that when you become aware of them, you can recognize them, and therefore that makes it easier to understand Sri Aurobindo when we read him. Some of these themes, some of these frameworks, some of these Yoga Sutras, we can call them, are derived from the ancient texts of Sanatana Dharma. So you will say, what is new in it? But at the same time, some of these themes are also invented and brought together by Sri Aurobindo for the first time. So when we talk of this layering, there is a certain gradation that goes on from the ancient texts of Sanatana Dharma to the yoga of future, as yesterday Anmol was saying. So right from thousands of years ago to probably another few thousands of years ahead. So that is the spread of these 12 themes that we are talking about. Also, these themes intertwine 2 aspects of Sri Aurobindo, both the philosophy and the yoga part of it, though mostly they are tilted towards the yoga part of it, because these Yoga Sutras and the way we have brought them together, it is primarily to help practitioners more than philosophers. So this is the background of this talk that we are calling Frameworks of Integral Yoga or Integral Yoga Sutras. So let us start first with what Sri Aurobindo has called involution and evolution, or more simply, ascent and descent. Each of us at an individual level is seeking a certain spiritual fulfillment. Each of us is trying to find that one place to arrive at where we have spiritual fulfillment. We are trying to seek something beyond the mundane. And this seeking is going on through each of us. In those, at one stage, probably we try to fulfill that seeking by material gain. And probably at a certain stage in life or a certain stage in evolution of the soul, we come to a point where we say we cannot seek fulfillment in material terms alone, and then we want to exceed ourselves. But here is an interesting question. Why is there this seeking? Why is there this seeking? The seeking to evolve, the seeking to move ahead, the seeking to grow. Sri Aurobindo gives beautifully multiple dimensions to this question. The first thing that he says is, at an individual level, we are seeking the divine because it is the spark of the divine that is already inside of us. The reason we seek fulfillment and moving ahead and realizations is because there is a seed of light inside of us, a spark of the divine. So there was a descent of that spark into the ignorance, and now we are a part of the process where the ignorance is seeking complete enlightenment. And Sri Aurobindo actually describes it also in a form of a double evolution. At an individual level, this seeking is in terms of self-realization, but there is also the seeking at a species level. The dead matter broke, or life was seeded into the dead matter, and then mind evolved, and man is part of that evolution going forward. So in addition to this individual soul and its realization, there is a species that is trying to evolve. And that is where man eventually is to find fulfillment in Superman. So it's kind of a double evolution. One, at an individual level, we are seeking the divine, and at a species level, we are also trying to become suitable vessels for the divine golden light to arrive into matter, embed into matter. And this is the ascent and descent that Sri Aurobindo talks about. So this is one framework. In fact, when we speak of the golden light, we do remember how on the 5th of December, when Sri Aurobindo shed his mortal body, there was a golden light that was suffused in him, that was emanating out. It was a tangible representation of this ascent and descent at work. So this is one thread that we can keep in mind when we talk of Sri Aurobindo and his philosophy, evolutionary philosophy. We won't go much into that. Then the second theme that we can probably touch upon is, in everything that is around us and actually in what we are, there is a play of a very interesting duality of form and formless. At one level, we would like to say, when we think of any friend, when we think of any person, the first thought that comes to us is about how that person looks. A height, a certain texture of the skin, a certain color, etc., etc. That is how the world is represented in the form. But along with it, there is a formless aspect in practically everyone and everything around us. We ourselves are not just form. I'm sure if we look at any of us individually, we are a bundle of the body and then the mind and emotions. We will come to that again in the next framework, but still, the mind and emotions are the formless aspect of the individual. So each individual is a combination of the form and formless. Similarly, when we talk of religion or puja or anything like that, we don't worship a stone. We worship the formless that is represented in the stone. When we look at the world around us and when we have interactions with the world around us, we know what Mother said. Mother said, don't look at the individuals that you're interacting with. Look at the forces that are behind it. So in the spiritual path, if we have to move ahead, we would do well to remember that there is an interplay of form and formless that is in front of us, that is within us, and that is around us. In every circumstance, we have to see the play of form and formless. Otherwise, spiritual journey would be very difficult. If we attribute everything only to the individual, there is a problem. We have to see the forces behind. And as we go through spiritual life, we need to keep this aspect in mind. And we need to observe our own formlessness a little more closely, the vibrations we carry and all of that. So this is an important part of what we need to remember at the individual level, at the social level, at the collective level. The interplay of form and formless is crucial to spiritual living and growth. Another framework, and this framework comes from the traditional literature about Panchakoshas, and in that, they talk about the three gunas. In fact, we cannot probably refer to any important text without the three gunas being discussed. The Sattva guna, the Rajo guna, and the Tamo guna. There are many students of Bhagavad Gita in the spiritual path in general in India, and we know how much emphasis the Gita places on the gunas. For each of us, there is a very interesting trap that we all fall into in spiritual life. We confuse familiarity with realization. We confuse familiarity with realization. Because I am familiar with the terms Sattva guna, Rajo guna, Tamo guna, somewhere implicit in me is the assumption that I have already mastered these gunas, that I already know it, so I don't need to study further. But when we talk of these gunas, when you read Sri Aurobindo either in Essays on the Gita or in Synthesis of Yoga, the depth to which he analyzes these gunas and the pervasiveness of these gunas in every aspect of our life is astounding. While many of you may already be familiar, for those of you who are in the beginner's part trying to understand these gunas, I just shared a couple of sentences of Sri Aurobindo, one sentence on each of these gunas, and then we will take it forward. Sattva guna is the turn of nature that is full of light and poise. It is directed to good, to knowledge, to delight, to beauty and happiness, right understanding, right equilibrium, right order, clarity, brightness, equilibrium. These are the terms of Sattva guna. Raja guna is the way of passion and desire, action, thirst for desire. It is the kinetic force, energy, activity, the power that creates and acts and can overcome. It can overcome resistance. So anything that is kinetic, that is in motion, that is moving, that wishes to progress, that all of that has its origin in Rajas. So much so, in fact, in the ancient texts, when they talk about Purusha, Prakriti, how the world came into being, they said in the original equilibrium, Sattva, Rajas, Tamas were all static. But then there was a vibration in Rajoguna, and that is where the whole world started coming into being. So where there is movement, there is Rajas. Sattva is calm, but it is moved by the Rajasic element. And then the difficulty of Rajoguna in all of us is that in Rajoguna is embedded the ignorance of nature. It is moved by the wrong lights or half lights of the ignorance, and it is perverted by the touch of the Asura, the Rakshasa, and the Pisacha, says Sri Aurobindo. And if we are to look at the society around us and we have to look at one guna that dominates, it is the Rajoguna. And then there is the Tamoguna, the incapacity, the darkness, the negativity, the pessimism. All of this is the Tamoguna. And all of us are a mixture of all the three. We all know that. But here is what is interesting. When we examine ourselves as spiritual seekers on a daily basis, and we examine our behavior, when we examine our interaction with other people, sometimes we feel good, sometimes when we feel bad. If we have to analyze all of that, we have to look at the gunas. And these three gunas percolate into every domain of our existence. In fact, recently, as I was working with a group of youngsters, 30s, or late 20s and 30s, we documented in how many different areas the gunas impact us and how Sri Aurobindo has written about it. The gunas can be observed in the kind of knowledge that we reflect, in the kind of action that we take, in the kind of work that we do. There is a tamasic worker, rajasic worker, sattvic worker. There is a tamasic knowledge, tamasic way of acquiring knowledge. There is a rajasic way of manifesting knowledge. There is a sattvic way. And then there is a happiness, tamasic happiness, rajasic happiness, and sattvic happiness. How we derive the happiness and what we like is kind of governed by these gunas. Then there is ego, the sattvic ego, the tamasic ego, the rajasic ego. And then, very interestingly, speech. What comes out of us? There is a tamasic flavor, there is a rajasic flavor, and there is a sattvic flavor. And then this beats everything else. Even time. Time is different depending on our consciousness, whether we are imbued by sattva, rajas, or tamas. So we have to understand these gunas, we have to examine these gunas, we have to be careful about how they are reflected in us. And so what about these gunas? What do we do? How do we move forward? The key is available in Yoga of Self-Perfection, where Sri Aurobindo says that there are two steps in this movement for the sadhak. The first step is to move towards sattva from rajas and tamas. In action, in speech, in thought, in work, in time, everything, we have to move towards sattva. First step. The second step is a flowering into triguna tita, where you grow beyond these three gunas. It is a whole subject in itself, and keep in mind that when we are doing this session today, we are actually going to try and touch upon many themes very briefly and Those of you who are interested can take up all of these themes for self-study. In fact, when I discussed with Anand Bhaiya this particular talk, he said we wanted a 1 hour talk, not a series of talks and workshop that we are looking at, because that is the scale and scope of the subjects we are touching. But that is Purna Yoga, that is integral yoga. So we're going to touch upon everything briefly, and maybe towards the end we may not have time, so I might just mention 1 or 2 of these Yoga Sutras, and then we may skip them also. But that's okay. Whatever we cover, we will cover it in a meaningful way, and then we will try to give the rest out, and some of you can work on them if you are interested in going further. One of the very important frameworks in the light of Mother and Sri Aurobindo is the framework of physical, vital, and mental. This is a very important framework. Sri Aurobindo advises us to look at these 3 elements primarily, and then build and work on each of these elements in a conscious sort of way. Physical, we all know what it is the body. So what is the big deal about it? Well, there is a lot to talk about the body in the path of integral yoga, starting from becoming conscious of it, gradually making the body sattvic, all the way up to the physical transformation that Mother talks about. The vital, oh, this is not just an element, it's actually an orchestra. All of us are governed 24/7, including our dreams, by the vital. There is a whole range of work that we need to do on the vital. And then there is the mental and the mind. Even before we talk of in another framework further, we'll talk about the gradations of mind, even becoming aware of our mind and what all goes in. According to one book, there is 63,000 thoughts in our mind every day. That's almost a thought a second, maybe more. So becoming conscious of these 3 elements. How do we become conscious? Well, here is where it becomes interesting. We talked about overlaying of gunas. Overlay rajas, tamas, and sattva on physical, vital, and mental. Is my body mostly tamasic or rajasic or sattvic? Is the food I eat rajasic, tamasic, or sattvic? Is the sleep I get rajasic, tamasic, or sattvic? It changes period to period, but I'm talking in general. My faculty of speech, my emotions. In fact, I'll simplify this. We have done this exercise before. When you lay down this grid, physical under sattva, rajas, tamas, vital under sattva, rajas, tamas, mental under sattva, rajas, tamas, and you do a little bit of analysis, 80% of people have the strongest element as rajasic vital. Rajasic vital. In fact, you can put this grid, 3x3 grid, and give some percentages how your conduct is over the last 1 week. It's an excellent tool for self-assessment. What do we do? Well, we talked about the first step. Try to shift all of this to sattvic. And Mother has given so many guidance, so much guidance and so many guidelines on how to do this. So I will not dwell further on it. I think I've touched upon this physical, vital, and mental framework. That is something that keeps recurring and recurring and recurring in Sri Aurobindo's literature. It is important we understand it. If you look at the small book, The Mother, it's an excellent book. And in fact, the next framework connects directly to it. In that also, when Sri Aurobindo talks of aspiration, rejection, surrender, he goes into physical, vital, and mental. So anyway, now let us come to aspiration, rejection, and surrender. Those of you who may or may not have come across this framework, who are new to Sri Aurobindo, there is a small book which is available in ebook format also, called The Mother. Many of us consider that to be one of the most important foundations of integral yoga. And everyone should read that book at least once a year. And many times, if you're a beginner, I would say read the book page to page, cover to cover, and keep reading it in circular motion again and again till you get a grasp of the various themes. And those of you who are serious about it, there's a wonderful series by Anand Bhaiya on YouTube, Reflections on the Mother, which takes up chapter 6, and we have around 28 talks on it, 28 hours of talks on it. Very, very profound. And I would encourage any serious seeker to actually make an effort and go through that series of talks. I have personally benefited, and many of my friends have benefited from that series. So, what is aspiration, rejection, and surrender? Sri Aurobindo says that while we are doing spiritual sadhana in the integral yoga, a personal effort is required on behalf of the sadhaka. And the personal effort required is the triple labor of aspiration, rejection, and surrender. An aspiration, vigilant, constant, and unceasing, the mind's will, the heart seeking, the ascent of the vital being, the will to make plastic the physical consciousness and nature. So he talks about how should be your aspiration in the mental, how should be your aspiration in the vital, how should be your aspiration in the physical. Similarly, he talks about rejection and he talks about surrender. There are so many elements embedded inside of us that we need to gradually get rid of. How do we start? First, make a mental note of it and then use your will to reject these elements one by one, one by one. It will take time, but the work begins only when there is an intense calling and a desire to overcome our own lower nature. So, aspiration, rejection, surrender. When somebody wrote to the mother about the difficulty of rejecting and the difficulty of overcoming one's weakness, mother said something very, very insightful. She said the human will is incapable of overcoming even one of the strong weaknesses that is embedded in human nature. It is only the divine grace that can elevate our nature and light up the cells, as we were listening yesterday. So there comes surrender. You offer yourself to the mother. You say, Mother, I am doing my best, but by the way, you please take care of it. Gradually surrendering. Surrender is the first word of integral yoga, and surrender is the last word of integral yoga. That is what is said. So aspiration, rejection, and an active surrender, not a passive surrender. This is a very important framework. Again, the overlaying of frameworks between physical, vital, mental, and aspiration, rejection, and surrender is beautifully outlined in the small book, The Mother. Please study it. Please take it up and read it multiple times. And keep in mind that the Mother's and Sri Aurobindo's words are not just. The words are just not a transfer of knowledge to the intellect. The more we read them, the more we make them our own, the more we make our nature open to receiving them, the more mantric their power is. And therefore, the closer we come to the realization of that truth inside of our being. This is the power embedded in Mother's and Sri Aurobindo's words. It's not just a transfer of intellectual knowledge and then we say, oh no, I know this. And that is where we fall into this trap that I mentioned of knowledge versus realization. Familiarity versus realization. The only way we can transfer this knowledge to realization is by reading, invoking, surrendering, and making that a part of our sadhana. Then we come to a particular framework or Yoga Sutra of integral yoga. This is the sixth one we are touching upon today. But it is the golden vein of integral yoga. Without it, one can read all the volumes, one can quote all of Sri Aurobindo, and Sri Aurobindo has even said, you can have many siddhis, but nothing will come of it. And that is the psychic being and its sadhana. It is very, very important that we understand what this is and what its role is in integral yoga. Even if we do not know much else about integral yoga, this is the most important element. I will not dwell in detail upon it, but I will ensure that we make a little bit a beginning of it. Because not a talk, but actually all of us should have at some point a satsang of maybe 3 or 4 days, a retreat of 3 or 4 days, to really grasp, receive, understand, and open ourselves in this dimension. Maybe we will. Let us see. Psychic being is essentially the divine spark that came down and embedded itself inside of us. And that is what is seeking the divine inside of us. We talked about it in Ascent and Descent. It is that little spark. And the most important part of integral yoga is allowing that spark to gradually grow into a flame, the psychic spark into a psychic flame or a psychic entity. Well, how do we do that? What prevents us? The phrase Sri Aurobindo uses, or the example, the simile that he uses is like right now our psychic being is like a king, but in a room with the curtains shut, screened off. It is there inside of us, but the physical, vital, and mental have taken charge of our being. And we believe that we are this physical, and we believe life is for ensuring that we are able to satisfy our vital desire. And we believe mind is the navigator that allows us to navigate through world to satisfy our desire. This, in a nutshell, is the summary of our life, while the king is sitting screened in his chamber. So what do? Go deep into the heart. Concentrate in the heart. Silence the mind and go inside of yourself, trying to seek the divine here. And as one goes deeper and deeper and deeper, while there may be a sensation of going down into a well or going through caves, there sits the spark. And as we meditate, as we go deeper, gradually the psychic being begins to illumine our nature. What else can we do? We can understand what are the psychic vibrations. The vibration of the psychic is the vibration of truth. The vibration of the psychic is the vibration of the divine. It is the vibration of surrender, happiness, uncaused joy. The simple beauty of existence is reflected in psychic. The psychic is soft. This is how the psychic vibration is. And we have to make space for that vibration in our interaction with others. We have to make that vibration felt in who we are. We have to make that vibration gradually seep into our outer nature from being hidden deep inside. As we do that, gradually the vital begins to be under the psychic light. The mental begins to be under the psychic light. And it is only these elements that are gradually changed by the psychic nature that actually allow us to blossom from life to life. Everything else that is not under the psychic influence gradually gets cast off. It is shed before we take on our next life. So the importance of psychic being and its bringing it forward and molding our nature, molding our physical, vital, and mental into the psychic influence is the most important theme of integral yoga sadhana. It is the most important Yoga Sutra, Purna Yoga Sutra. So we have to keep that in mind. Next, we move to yet another important, pervasive, and necessary, and also this might strike you a little bit as perhaps an overstatement, a very achievable part of integral yoga. This is the sadhana of Purusha and Prakriti. When you read Sri Aurobindo, particularly the yogic works, you will feel and find everywhere, practically in every chapter, some direct or indirect reference to Purusha and Prakriti. Whether it is synthesis of yoga, whether it is essays on the Gita, whether it is life divine, and of course Savitri. I mean, once I requested one very dear friend of mine in Hyderabad to see if she could compile sentences from Savitri on Purusha and Prakriti. And when she put herself to the task, she and I both were amazed at the number of sections in Savitri where Purusha and Prakriti appear. What is Purusha and Prakriti? Let's step back a little bit. This theme of Purusha and Prakriti comes from Sankhya Darsana of Kapila Muni, dated somewhere around 5th century BC. There is no specificity, but it appears there first. And then it also is referred to in both the Gita and the Upanishads. The example that is given in the Upanishads, which many of you know, about two birds on a tree, one eating the fruit and the other observing, is referring to Purusha and Prakriti. The bird enjoying the fruit, and then the sufferings and the joys of life, and the witness that is watching life as it progresses. This is Purusha and Prakriti. So this is the allegory that is talked about in the Upanishads. In Sri Aurobindo's words, let me read a little bit about Prakriti first. Prakriti is the universal energy that also manifests in us. Now, what does he mean when he says Prakriti is the universal energy that also manifests in us? Think of it like this. The sunlight that falls on a tree, the air that is available to the tree, the nutrients that the tree draws through the soil, all of this is Prakriti. And what the tree does is it converts all of it into energy, and it uses the energy to manifest its swabhava. What is the swabhava of a tree? The swabhava of a tree is to produce flowers and fruits and to grow leaves, flowers, and fruits. This is universal energy at work in a tree. Prakriti is the universal energy that also manifests in us. I also take nutrients in the form of physical food. I also draw energy to sustain me through air, the universal energy, sunlight. And what do? I take all of this universal energy, and what does that energy get converted to in this body? It gets converted to life energy that allows me to operate the jnanendriyas and the karmendriyas. I see, I hear, I taste, I work, I speak. And there is one very important thing that I do, whether I want it or not, it happens in my body. Do you know what it is? In fact, it happens continuously. The energy creates thoughts in this mind. Because this brain is plugged into this body, I feed energy into this body, the brain starts manufacturing thoughts. That is Prakriti at work. It is mechanical, it is repetitive. These are the words of Sri Aurobindo referring to Prakriti, and that is what my mind is most of the time. 63,000 thoughts in a mind, 80% of them repeat from day to day without any control of me. The lower Prakriti is impure and blind. That is my vital nature at work. All my desires, they are fueled by this universal energy. Lower Prakriti is the power of the ignorance. It is the play of ignorant forces. Prakriti is the basic source of cause, effect, and agency. My friends, I don't know how to put it softly. 99% of the time we are lost in the lower Prakriti. And what is Purusha? And this is where our redemption lies. Purusha is the conscious existence. The highest Purusha is the body. In the body is the one who watches, who sanctions, who enjoys, who upholds. Basically, we have the capacity to observe, Sakshi Purusha. And as we work on ourselves and slowly get into basic meditation, begin to observe our thoughts, separate ourselves from the thoughts, bring in silence in the mind, we can begin to observe ourselves. This separation of Purusha and Prakriti, Sri Aurobindo gives 3 steps in synthesis of yoga. Observation, detachment, and control. Observe yourself and say that this is not me, this is Prakriti at work. In fact, there are 3 beautiful chapters in synthesis of yoga: release from subjection to the body, release from subjection to the life and mind, and release from subjection to the ego. These are mandatory readings for all of us who wish to make spiritual progress. And these three chapters elaborate how gradually we can move ourselves a little bit behind, and then we become the Sakshi Purusha, and then we begin to make progress. Observation, detachment, and control is the first step. The Purusha can control Prakriti only if he detaches from Prakriti. And thereafter comes mastery, and thereafter comes transformation, but that is advanced course. So right now we will just know that there is Purusha and Prakriti, and observation and detachment and control, that is possible to separate Purusha and Prakriti. And believe me, my friends, when I say this, if we make it a priority and begin to work on it, it is possible within a matter of just a few years or maybe even a few months. We just have to become aware and start working on it. It is a very important part of it, the whole yoga and sadhana. It is important to work on this. Otherwise, integral yoga or any other yoga, this is very difficult to move forward if there is no separation. So please make a note of that, and then you can do further research on it. Another framework that Sri Aurobindo talks about, and it appears in multiple places: individual, universal, and transcendental. Individual, I, as I exist. Universal, everything around me that exists, the terrestrial existence, and even the cosmic existence. And transcendental, that which goes beyond both the individual and the universal. And the transcendental exceeds even the time and space. These are three frames of reference that Sri Aurobindo uses. I will just read out a couple of sentences on it so that we understand what these references are. The transcendent is not moving, it is not going anywhere. It is eternal and unchanging. It is a timeless dimension, above creation, at the origin of creation. Universal is all that which manifests all of existence. Space, time, duality, gunas, all of these. Gunas are not particular to this body, gunas are there in the universe. And the individual is actually, he has the capacity and channels open to the universal and open to the transcendent. But mostly we are caught in the trap of the universal. When we talked earlier of physical, vital, mental in each of us, the physical, vital, and mental of man is not just the individual isolated existence, it is plugged into the universal existence of the physical, vital, and mental. How? Very simple. How can I exist if I don't eat food? How can I exist if I don't draw on oxygen? How can I exist if there is no sunlight? All of that is coming from the universal plane. That is the physical part. But here is something more interesting. And every sadhak should know this and remember it and try to become aware of it more consciously. Our vital and mental also are plugged into the universal vital and universal mental. And this is one of the reasons why it is difficult to overcome even a single weakness in us completely. Because even as we make progress at the individual level, there is an interlink between the universal and the individual. Therefore, some element of that universal energy keeps coming in, and because I have a resonating frequency, I accept it. And that is where the purification becomes very interesting and difficult and prolonged, and that is where to uproot desire from its bleeding roots, as the image is in Savitri, we need the help of the divine to work. So there is the individual existence, there is the universal existence, and there is a transcendental existence. In the small book, The Mother, in chapter 6, Sri Aurobindo even talks about the mother as the individual and the universal and the transcendent. One sadhika who was with the mother at one point asked her, "Mother, I know the individual mother. You are standing in front of us. I work with you every day. But what is your universal aspect?" The mother apparently took 2 steps forward And where she was hitherto standing, there was a column of white light. She revealed and gave the eyes to this lucky sadhika to see that there is a universal energy that is continuously streaming through her. These are three aspects that one sees recurring again and again and again in Sri Aurobindo's works. And in our sadhana also, it is important that we have to do the individual, universal, and transcendental aspects as a part of sadhana. Individual is the deepening part that goes more and more into the psychic dimension. Universal is the expansion along the horizontal axis, the cosmic realization, the identity with everyone around us. All of that comes in the universal realization, the cosmic realization, the cosmic consciousness, and then the transcendental part where we are able to visualize not only as a witness to the body, but the witness to this entire universe, the galaxies floating, and that's a different timeless existence. So that gives us a glimpse into the universal, transcendental, and the individual aspects. Then there is another important aspect of integral yoga that one should touch upon. To be able to speak to others about Sri Aurobindo, when we talked about involution and evolution, you see the threads of these themes are all interwoven, yet they are important and dependent on each other. Each successively clarifies the previous ones, and each early ones build the foundation for the others. So when we talked of involution and evolution as the first framework, if you ask Charles Darwin, "Oh, Mr. Darwin, man has come, what should we do now?" After all, you said evolution, yes, from the tadpole, I have come all the way to being a man, what should I do? Darwin would say, well, there's nothing much you can do, just sit quiet and eventually man will supersede himself. Not so with Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo says that yoga is how conscious evolution becomes possible. From here on, the man has the capacity to collaborate with nature, to exceed nature. Yoga is evolution compressed into one lifetime. And what is the evolution on the mental plane that he talked about? He talked about gradations of mind. He talks about the mind of man is chaotic with 80, 60, 63,000 thoughts every day, but it is possible and very much within the grasp of every one of us who are on this call today. It is possible to be able to exceed this mind, going into higher mind. It is possible to be able to silence ourselves. It is possible to be able to receive that silence into us at a very basic level. A higher mind where we operate with a degree of openness to the spiritual themes, spiritual words, all of these things. We understand and become conscious of our thoughts. We are able to use our capacity to be able to be calm, have a little more wideness, all of these elements. Then we come to the gradations of illumined mind, intuitive mind, overmind, and supermind. This is a bit of an advanced subject, but it is also an important subject when we talk of integral yoga. Sri Aurobindo talks about how there are so many natural potentialities in this mind of ours that we haven't even begun to tap into. And if we work consciously, it is possible to go beyond one by one. The mind as it exists today is half light and half darkness, half ignorance, half knowledge. And it is borne out in the business world also. There was a study that was done in the field of business where people went and actually analyzed important business decisions that were taken to see how many turned out to be right and how many turned out to be wrong. And important business decisions are not taken lightly. They are taken based on vast amount of information and a very intelligent group of CEOs, CTOs sitting in a place. And what they found was only around 52% of these critical important decisions where crores of rupees is spent turned out to be right. Only 52. Essentially half. Why did the other half fail? Because our mind is only capable of grasping at a little bit of this vast reality. And as we move to the higher planes, we lose this duality and arrive into oneness. Well, layer by layer, how intuitive mind is able to give us a little bit more. In Life Divine, Sri Aurobindo talks about how the present state of man's mind is we are going through an unfamiliar territory using a torchlight. When we get to illumined mind, it becomes more like a territory where you have sunlight. When you talk of intuitive mind, you have flashes of lightning. And then you come to overmind, where the duality begins at its very root. And even there, the shadow of ignorance continues. And then you go to supermind, where you are beyond the dualities and where there is knowledge by identity. So these are all the gradations of mind that one has to take up. And as you are aware, it is a subject that is, for those of you who have read Mother and Sri Aurobindo, we know how important and how deep and how vast that is. But any talk of a summary of integral yoga would be incomplete without at least a reference to this. And then we take up a framework which is familiar to many of us and probably dear to many of us also. The framework relating to wisdom, strength, harmony, and perfection. Or knowledge, strength, harmony, and perfection, the four powers. When you read Sri Aurobindo's philosophy, whether it is the social philosophy in War and Self-Determination or Ideal of Human Unity, all of these works, the Human Cycle, all of these works, or whether you read the yogic works of Sri Aurobindo, in both, Sri Aurobindo talks about how knowledge, strength, harmony, and perfection are important. There is, in the social element, he talks about how there has been age after age of each of these areas, each of these facets dominating humanity to move forward. We talk about it in the, and then he relates it to the Indian Varna system also, where he talks about Brahmin, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra with the light of knowledge, strength, harmony, and perfection. How it is only in that respect that a self-sustaining society can be built. The Kshatriya Dharma was as important as the knowledge aspect, and the service aspect was as important as the knowledge aspect. Not one inferior or one superior. It is a balance that is required to maintain a stable society. That is how the Varna is understood. And then, of course, if you come to integral yoga sadhana, we talk about Maheshwari, Mahakali, Mahalakshmi, and Mahasaraswati. How each of these four powers is active in the integral yoga. Not only in integral yoga, I would even say each of these powers is active and guiding our own sadhana, our own nature. And we have to align, understand, discover what is already in us, what is flowering already in us, what is in a bud stage in us, how do we move forward and bring each of these aspects. And now with YouTube, everything becomes easy. We have in Mother's own voice the recording of the four powers of the Mother. One can sit, if one particular aspect needs to be brought forward, one can sit, listen to the Mother in her own voice. Each of these aspects takes about 12 to 13 minutes. When you listen, it's such a beautiful meditation just to listen to her voice and connect with her. It opens up a way of channeling ours, opening our channels to her force. It's a very important aspect of integral yoga that we need to keep in mind. And the last framework I will touch upon for today, and very briefly so, the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo is the yoga of transformation. And Sri Aurobindo spoke of transformation in the phrase of triple transformation: the psychic transformation, the spiritual transformation, and the supramental transformation. The opening of the psychic being or the soul, when it comes forward and begins to govern the mind, life, and body, that is the psychic transformation. And as we work on our nature, I touched upon this slightly in the earlier psychic being aspect. I will not go back to that. It is important to work on the individual aspect through psychic transformation. It cannot be emphasized enough. And this is the first transformation, first of the three transformations. So you can understand the importance given to it in the integral yoga sadhana. The opening of the inner mind, inner vital, and inner physical to the influence of psychic. Spiritual transformation. This is where the work begins of universalizing our nature also. The spiritual transformation is the universal transformation, gradually opening our being wider and vaster, letting energies come in and flow out in a more harmonized way. No man is an island. We no longer subscribe to the ego-based body and drive everything based out of our ego. We become an instrument for the universal energies to carry us. The force of the mother carries us as through a river, and we open ourselves more and more. Transforming all the parts of the physical and the vital and the mental. The spiritual transformation leads to the realization of the cosmic self, cosmic consciousness. The concentration above the head, coupled with the aspiration, initiates a contact with the Jivatman, the central being which is located above the head, and starts more consciously the process of ascent and descent. The first framework we talked about, we're coming back to it in the 12th framework again. One rises above the mind and governs everything from above. So now we are slowly evolving to a higher grade of consciousness. We begin to work, but we begin to work not from inside out. We begin to work from above and use this body as one of the many channels in this terrestrial plane. Siddhas in the universal realization can use multiple instruments, not just this one body. It's like a hydrogen balloon, one thread goes on and you are hovering over there. And then there is a supramental transformation where you are really going above even the universal. This is beyond the time and space. This is where you are bordering Sat, Chit and Ananda. The supramental transformation begins when the lid between the lower and higher, the aparartha and parartha, and then instead of overmind becoming the governing power of existence, we begin to rise to the ascent, we reason to ascend into the supramental plane. But, for many of us, we are still this ant that is looking up at the golden moon and saying, I want to be there. So I won't belabor this point, but I mention it for the sake of completeness. So that brings me to the completion of these 12 Yoga Sutras. We started with ascent and descent. We gradually built one upon the other and tried to move forward in an increasing order of complexity. Ascent and descent, form and formless, sattvic, rajasic, tamasic, physical, vital, mental, aspiration, rejection, surrender, psychic being and its sadhana. Then we talked about the Purusha and Prakriti. We talked about individual, universal and transcendental. One which I did not touch upon, which I should have, is the synthesis of bhakti, jnana, karma, and yoga of self-perfection. That framework is something that I haven't been able to get into a lot of detail, but it is important that we cover that also as we work in the integrality of Mother and Sri Aurobindo. Jnana Yoga and Bhakti Yoga and Karma Yoga, all of the three simultaneously implemented in our life is what is synthesis of yoga for us. The Viveka and Vairagya, the discrimination, the will, all of that comes in the Jnana Yoga part. And in integral yoga, as much as bhakti is important, please make a note that we have to work on the intellect part. Jnana Yoga will be one of the important drivers to most humans because we work through the mind. Bhakti Yoga, adoration of the Guru, intimate connection with the Mother, intimate connection with Sri Aurobindo, offering everything to her. And Karma Yoga, not being obsessed with the type of work we are being asked to do, with the fruits of the work that we are being asked to, the work that we are doing and the fruits of the work associated with it. And if we grow more and more in this sadhana of integral yoga, the ego of the worker also gets dissolved. Only then we are able to be a perfect worker. So That, and then Purusha and Prakriti, individual, universal, and transcendental. We talked about the gradations of the mind, we talked about the four powers, and we talked about the triple transformation. So, those are the 12 themes of integral yoga, the 12 integral yoga sutras, as Anand Bhaya and I are christening it going forward. That is the culmination, that is the summary of integral yoga. These 12 things bring integral yoga in some way. If you have to explain to somebody or understand for yourself what is integral yoga, the 12 themes bring all major aspects of integral yoga together at one place. So, with that, I will stop here. Shruti, over to you now. I'm sorry if I've exceeded my allocated time.
Well, Srinivas, it's been a wonderful overview, and as you rightly called 12 Yoga Sutras, and you have really covered the whole gamut of things that really go to form the integral yoga. And these are, as we see, more or less the principles. Of course, in 1 hour you cannot deal much. So these are the overall principles that are dealt with in the synthesis of yoga. And these are really taken up in depth in the entire book, afterwards you'll see. But also you'll see the minute you say Yoga Sutras, you have now the next work to take up the Mahavakyas of integral yoga. Mahavakyas.
Mahavakyas, yes. Yes.
What you have done is more the principles, the sutras, which are really in concise form. You give the 12 names. But these sutras will end up again bringing out, as you say, the Upanishads and the Mahavakyas. I would give you the responsibility to find out the Mahavakyas, because that will become the process. One is the principle, the other is the process. The process is the Mahavakya. Of course, in the Upanishads, the Mahavakyas are also philosophies and principles. But here, I think we'll have to work on this Mahavakyas so that it matches with the sutras. So it becomes a complete thing. The sutras, as you have dealt with, you have given the philosophy of integral yoga, all into 12 forms and 12 formats. That's well done. But as you're going to have again month of January or February, I don't know when your term comes, the 3 talk that you'll be giving on the integral yoga. So there, I think you have to come up with the Mahavakyas. So you see these Mahavakyas, for example, one I'll give you right on the spot: remember me and offer.
Yes. Yes.
That's a Mahavakya. I mean, you
Absolutely.
can write a whole book on that. So what I mean is, such Mahavakyas, you should be able to find about half a dozen or a dozen or a 10 or 12, doesn't matter. But that will be where your sutras will be complemented with the Mahavakyas. Then you can have a whole, the principles and the process. Otherwise, yes, in the given time, you have really come out with all the main ideas. But each idea, as you know very well, as the sutra is, it is dense with the expansion of ideas. So I think, Srinivas, I think you have done a wonderful job, given us a wonderful image of what synthesis is, especially for the newcomers. It gives us a global picture. I mean, we are not getting into the intensity of the whole thing. Well, and your simple language, your examples are very, very profound and very catching. Unfortunately, we do not have much time for you to answer some of the very good questions that have come up with. And I wish you could answer them, but now you have some homework to do, because you have to go back home and then you have to answer this. Either you can do an audio answer or a written answer, but some of them do require an answer. For example, what is the difference between a passive surrender and an active surrender? You see, when you speak of surrender, these are the obvious questions that come up with. So these things, I think you take time and answer them, because these are very pertinent things, and you should clarify them.
Definitely.
Good. I think we have had a wonderful session. One more feather in Sakar's cap. We have the 8th talk all have been wonderful 8 feathers in Sakar's cap. And thank you so much, Srinivas. And the difference is that you have a black beard and I have a white beard. That's the only difference. Otherwise, the wisdom is the same. You have learned really read Sri Aurobindo very well. And especially the last 4 aspects that you brought about the mother. In fact, I remember Sri Aurobindo writing somewhere that the secret of the longevity of India's culture is its own this system of the 4 castes. It's not the 4 castes, in the sense that we have in the present times, but the way you explain that these 4 caste system that we have, Brahman, Vaishya, etc., are based on this eternal 4, the wisdom, Kshatriya, and all that. So always we see India's secret of survival is that it is carried on the 4 aspects of humanity all along and very strict. So it can become kind of a controversial and sometimes very negative and bad. But somehow he says those cultures, those religions which do not have these 4 structures of society have faded away. So in fact, you should add that point that the secret of this lasting Indian culture is this 4, not caste, but the 4 powers. So it's a wonderful thing to see that this is the secret of India's culture, why it has lasted so long. And of course, now the age of Maha Saraswati has come, the age of modern period of perfection and work and materialism. And once again, we'll go back, the circle will come back. So the last point also has been a wonderful thing. Maybe next time you could explain the role of this 4 and then how Sri Aurobindo takes up again the other 4 male aspects of Krishna, Pradyumna, Aniruddha and all that. So that's the other aspects. So for us to understand, because some of us, we know the wisdom is Mahalakshmi, etc., but we don't know the others. But they're also taken from Vishnu Puran. So how again we can connect Sri Aurobindo with this ancient wisdom again? So that's a beautiful point which you could emphasize and bring about. Otherwise, so you are in Sakar stream again. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thank you, sir.
Thanks for all of you who attended. So it's welcome. Right? Thanks again. And those of you have further questions, please put them on immediately because tomorrow 10 o'clock the channel will be closed. So go ahead and give him the whole night out to work, depending on answering them. WhatsApp group. Right? Yeah, do answers. Thank you.
Thank you so much.